Okay, as soon as we all get settled, we're just gonna wait for. Sorry. We're just gonna wait for you to get settled, and then everybody should remember to use their microphone. That was a request from the city, so you just make sure you have it on when you're talking. We'll go from there. So, Grace, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yes. We're going to call the meeting of March 20th, the City Charter Review Committee to order. Grace, would you please call the roll?
Yep. Diane Gutierrez.
Present.
Pam Wheel. Here. Jonathan Foreman.
Here.
Jeffrey Hank.
Here.
Veronica Wilkerson Johnson.
Present.
Ruben Martinez.
Here.
Jill Rode.
Here.
Dale Krudoff.
Yes.
Lynn Richardson.
Here. Okay, move on to approval of the agenda as presented. Is there any, is there a motion to approve the agenda? I'll move the approval of the agenda. Is there a second? Oh, sorry. Second. Moved by Gadara, seconded by Wilkerson Johnson. And any corrections, additions, anything like? Saw your hand go up, but. Okay, we'll take a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. Now moving on to approval of the minutes. I'll move approval of the minutes as well. If we could just add, Grace, could we add our city attorney and city manager's names to who's present and to
Yes.
going forward and in the latest minutes, that'd be great. So with that correction, is there a second? Second. Moved by Gadara, seconded by Wilkerson Johnson. Any other corrections or additions to it? Again, thank you, Grace. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Okay, communications, written communications, you saw those in the packet as part of the agenda. So those are included as part of our record. Communications from the audience, 2.2. We have some attendees, so great. Please come forward to say your name for Grace.
Nation.
There it is. I'm Mark Grebner, 615 Glenmore Road. I'm actually here to talk just about item 4.2, the proposed changes to chapter 8. I don't know if I should just talk now or if there's a, I mean, that's what I should do? Okay, let me grab. I was only summoned to this meeting by Jeffrey like half an hour ago, so. I'm happen to be an attorney, although actually I should first ask, how much time do I have? Do I have to talk real fast and just cut myself off? I will try not to filibuster and I won't waste too much time. Okay. Okay.
We did want to get home in time for the game.
Okay.
Some of us. 10 o'clock.
So it might be useful to blend me in or at least ask some questions later on when you get to the item, but let me talk about now a broad picture. I'm an attorney, although I don't really practice law. I'm a county commissioner now for 48 years, off and on, representing the city of East Lansing. Been deeply involved in East Lansing city affairs. And it happens that I know a lot about FOIA law. I've probably filed a total of less than 100, but more than 50 lawsuits under the Free Information Act in Michigan. There are about 20 appellate decisions with my name in the title. I generally do not represent people. I generally am the plaintiff, and I am actually represented in all of them, just to show what a small world this is, by the mayor, George Brookover, mainly before he became mayor or ran for city council. He's been my attorney for, I don't know, 30 some years. Mainly doing FOIA work. So anyway, I'm knowledgeable about FOIA, and to a lesser extent because of the county commission, I'm also knowledgeable about the Open Meetings Act, but I'm less interested in that. East Lansing's posture. I filed many FOIA requests to the city of East Lansing. I have never sued East Lansing, sued just about everybody else, but I've never actually sued East Lansing. And I try to work things out. I'm not really a hothead, but I would say that my experience with East Lansing has been very consistent. And East Lansing has treated, and not just one person, not just one office, this has been true for the whole time I've been involved. East Lansing treats the FOIA as a sort of an absolute limit to what it should do. So if FOIA says you've got 5 days to reply, that means that no reply ever comes out of East Lansing until the 5th day. And if you send it to them by email, that gives them an extra day. And if there happens to be a city holiday involved, that gives them an extra day, and you can bet they won't reply on Tuesday if they legally could reply on Wednesday. And then on Wednesday, and this is not just one office, I assure you, then they send you the 10-day extension notice. And they then take 10 business days, and they take every last one of them. Once in a while, they've failed there and gotten to me on the 9th day. And I'm not really saying this with hostility, but it's just a mindset that if the law doesn't require it, then we shouldn't do it. We shouldn't provide anything to anybody that isn't required by law. And everybody looks at the law and the time limits and says, oh no, don't have to worry about that one yet. It's the opposite of a posture of providing public access. In many ways, the FOIA is actually an impediment to information, because if something is happening next week, the FOIA says you can wait roughly 20 days, 22 days, and you can get past the event. So if somebody wants to see the plans that are going to be reviewed by the Planning Commission, well, that's easy. The Planning Commission meeting is next week, and they're not going to see it until April, hell. And that posture is amazingly consistent across city employees. Now, it doesn't mean that individuals aren't friendly and helpful, but it does mean that as an institution, they're not. That's the first thing I want to bring to your attention. And that's why the draft, I don't know what exactly Jeffrey has done to my draft that I sent him, but that's one of the reasons that I talk about that the FOIA should be a beginning point. It should be something you never reach. You never get to the deadlines. You never find yourself actually invoking FOIA because you've complied with it, you've provided more access and so forth before that. A second thing is that the FOIA officer retreats, and it's not just one person, it's been 3 or 4 different people I've dealt with. They retreat into a posture of, my job is to shuffle paper. So you send a request in and they start the stopwatch so that they know when things are due. But all they're really doing is sending your request to the office that can answer it. And that office generates some response, and the FOIA office sends you the response. And it's pretty clear they do that without reading it, without thinking, this is inadequate. That can't be true. Of course they've got copies of this. I've never had a FOIA officer who was, even the ones that I know personally and am friendly with, the various city clerks who I work with in other contexts, I've never had a FOIA officer here who intervened and, as far as I know, got back to a department, worked with them to actually provide the information. So that's a second general point here, is that the FOIA officer ought to have some clout bureaucratically. They shouldn't be a low-level person. And their job should include facilitating, assisting, providing additional information, maybe getting back to the requester, not me, because I generally know what I'm asking for, but somebody who doesn't, actively asking, what is it you're looking for? Can we help you with that? Are you aware that we published this report? Have you looked at this thing yet? Okay. I've never had that happen from a FOIA officer because their job is just to take a piece of paper or email and send it, and then just like serving as a mail clerk. And then finally, the question is, what things are important under FOIA? FOIA is so broadly written. It's written so that it just, the statute I'm talking about, really encompasses everything. You'd be astounded what things are included under FOIA. I won't go into that, but it's just very broadly written. And so it's not about overseeing a city government. It's just a general access to everything. Okay. Well, the most important things that people want from city government, the most crucial things are things involving public policy. The city ought to have a policy, ought to have an internal policy summarized in the charter, put forth in the charter, articulated in the charter, that says our goal is to actually provide the things that people will want. And so the FOIA officer ought to be identifying those things. Department heads ought to be told to identify those things, to think about the documents that of course people will want. In the case of a development, say pending before the planning commission, proposed rezoning, of course they'll want the full documents, and not on the 20th day after they're filed. I mean, of course they'll want those, so make them available, put them online if you can, right? So if something is obviously of public interest, you make it available more easily, for free, easily online, so that people don't have to jump through hoops. But beyond that, if it's been requested repeatedly, maybe just by one person, but it's requested repeatedly, go out of your way if you can, as a city, to make it available, to make it so it's online, so that you can easily access it. Don't think of ways, frankly, under some conditions, the FOIA officer and the city of East Lansing have worked to hobble access. Now, I'll just provide one example. I'm actually just about to wrap up. It looks like the chair is becoming, okay. Okay, well, maybe I just, okay. So let's take a really important example, and that is East Lansing Info and Alice Drager, when she was at the center of it. Alice Drager did great work and really was a tremendous resource for the city. And I don't mean for city government, I mean for the voters and the public of the city. And all I can say is thank God the county doesn't have somebody who cares about us, because I wouldn't want to be picked at that way. We have our scandals and nobody ever noticed them. We can't get them in the paper if we issue a press release about embezzlement. Nobody cares. But you people, Alice went after you. And so the city of East Lansing found ways to hide documents from her. It was like almost an official policy that if Alice asked for something, the city attorney would go to work and try to figure out ways to prevent something from being released. The city's policy ought to be that no matter how unpleasant the people are, I mean, I just imagine there's a bunch of Republicans talking about vote fraud and with completely bogus theories about how elections are run. You ought to thank them for coming in. The city's official position should be they're on the side of the angels. They're the wrong angels, but they're on the side of the angels. That's a good thing, because they're interested in public policy. They're interested in looking at what you're doing. And even if they're completely wrong-headed, the city's position should be to facilitate that access, not to charge for it, to make it online if that's possible, to guide people to the right sources, to encourage department heads to make documents, to provide them in formats that are easily reproduced and provided. And just finally, one little tiny technical suggestion. Often a department head has a legal requirement to have some document available. And the moment somebody requests it, it becomes a problem because there's information on it that can't be released. And so the next thing you know, the question becomes how much will it cost to expunge that information, and how long will it take, and providing people an estimate and getting a deposit in advance, and around and around and around. And if the city just looked at the document and thought, we could set this up so we'd have a print version of that didn't include any of the home phone numbers and the social security numbers, we could release that instantly, and we could do it every day. And so the FOIA officer ought to have a substantive responsibility for encouraging departments to provide, prepare, maintain documents in a format that, like, there's a I don't know, not exactly a mirror image, but a publicly releasable version of it so that it's facilitated, right? So that just automatically, in the case of documents that are likely to be requested, police reports are one good example, planning documents, development documents are another. Voter information, who has voted and who hasn't, is commonly requested. And to deliberately encourage the maintenance of documents in a form that can be released by just clicking a button, right? And best of all, they don't require a FOIA request, that the public just goes on and gets a copy of some record. It is interesting that in many of the cases of commissions, you can't get the draft minutes of a meeting if you're the public, right? We don't have any right to it. What? Why? What? No, there's the draft minutes of a meeting that hasn't happened yet ought to be available by clicking on it. No, I say draft on it. And so on. I mean, just, of course, those things, the moment a developer files documents with the city, really, they ought to be scanned and out there, available. And if the developer doesn't like it, then he should go develop someplace else. Anyway, thank you for enduring all this. If you're at all interested, I'll stick around. Who knows, maybe somebody will ask me a question.
Documents, it seems to me that all the examples you've given are documents that should be included in packets. So if I'm on the police oversight committee, I would think that in my packet might be links to incidents that have occurred over the last month. I would think that if I'm in the DDA in my packet, any paperwork filing for development in the last month is going to be in my packet. So I'm looking for a way to operationalize this as much as possible, so we have as much of the public stuff just being, and that would be, oh, it's going into a meeting packet. We're going to have to redact social security numbers, but so that's just part of the thing. If I'm on a committee and there's mandated documentation for that department or that area of the city, I'd expect it to come in front of me in a meeting. So wouldn't that be an angle that maybe we could address? What, can you give me an example of some things that wouldn't be appropriate or wouldn't show up in a committee, subcommittee meeting?
Well, of the things I've talked about, for example, people often are down at the police desk getting police reports. That's just life, right? Somebody gets stopped or okay, that's not a meeting. Okay. Some development documents aren't. I mean, things filed by a developer with the city, some of the stuff goes to planning commission, but some of it's just plans and so forth that stay at engineering.
Wouldn't that be maybe something that the planning committee would request copies of in their consent agenda or in their communications packet? I'm just, I'm thinking if police oversight, we want records of all the events in the last month, and somebody might take a look at them, probably they won't, but but that facilitates it becoming public.
Well, I just think there's just a whole range of things that never get to public meetings, but that people want.
Such as?
Well, I just said, for example, police reports, planning documents.
It might fit into the committee.
Well, I'm just saying, not a police report is interesting. A police report is not at all interesting.
So there they be. So if I said, I show up at the library, I want the police reports, they're like, well, you can look at the agenda from the police oversight committee. They contain links to all this.
Okay.
Can I chime in here? So I'm trying to get a sense, because my sense is that a lot of the documentation that is of public interest that either the council or that a commission or a committee is going to be reviewing is available. It's available in the package that are out on the city's website. They're easily accessible.
Draft minutes.
Well, not easily accessible, but they're accessible.
Draft minutes.
Prior to any meeting that takes place.
Draft minutes aren't.
Our draft minutes are available at every meeting because we have
We have to review them and approve.
they're draft before they're approved.
Oh, okay.
So they are available.
Okay.
Maybe that's a change, but these are the kind of changes I'd like to see.
So I guess my question is, you keep going back to police reports, which are things that, to me as a defense attorney, are things that are of a purely private nature. Why should that be available for everyone to view online?
Well, some of them are.
Because if there's issues, we want to see them.
No, police incidents are different. I'm talking about a standard police report that talks about this person is alleged to have done this thing and here's the evidence we obtained. to do.
That tells me what the police are doing and who they're interacting with.
So, and those are available through FOIA. Police reports are,
Yeah.
as long as they're not related to an ongoing investigation, which
Right.
is something that's laid out in the FOIA statute. So I guess it seemed to me you had two different avenues. One was about the timeline of FOIA and the delays that occur. So that was one part, and then two was about the general accessibility of documents. Is that fair to
Well,
categorize what you're saying in two different?
I'd say there's the timeline and there's the duties of the FOIA officer. And I really think that your FOIA officer shouldn't be a clerk, shouldn't be just somebody who's a traffic cop. They should be somebody who's actually working to make things available. I mean, police reports are a good example. The only people really interested in police reports are a handful of people involved in the incident, right? And those are the people who are interested in getting copies. They're not part of a meeting. They're just, the 4 people who were present and so forth. But the point is, it ought to be available easily, and it shouldn't be difficult or impossible. And if anything, the city should facilitate providing them by having maybe an easy system for providing police reports. I'm just using as a hypothetical. The same thing.
My understanding, if you go to the police desk, you ask for a police report, to give it to you within the timeline provided by
Okay.
FOIA. That's my understanding of how police reports are disseminated right now.
I hope they do it faster than 20 days from today, but okay.
Well, I believe in most cases they do, because most pretrials are set on misdemeanor cases within 3 weeks, and police reports are available well before that.
That's my point. So, okay.
But my broader point is, and I don't mean to sound glib here, and I say this with respect, but when it comes to the timeline provided by FOIA, I think that those are, when someone asks for something, we don't want the processes of the city to stop, right? If it's budget season and someone makes a request of the budget office, and the person in the budget office has 5 days to respond under the FOIA statute, and then and they can request a 10-day extension, I think those are policy decisions that have been made by policymakers of the state to say, we understand that people are busy, people have other responsibilities, and that this is something that's not going to be immediately available. It might have to be subject to legal review by the city attorney. There's a lot of different things that go into it. And so I guess my question, what I don't understand is why, the language that we have here is that it shall be the policy of the city to provide free and immediate access to the public to all information in possession or under control of the city. That's in 8.1, that's the first sentence of it. When we talk about immediate, does that mean that when a FOIA request comes in, it's the language of this policy that everyone has to drop what they're doing right away and respond to that FOIA request instead of doing the running of the city?
If you're asking me, I think this is,
Interpretation of it is that all of that stuff should be included in minute packets, minutes and packets. It should be available like that.
but I don't think this is my draft, right? I think this is the one that's been worked up by somebody. I think that I had a slightly softer version of it. And they say that you aim for immediate. Immediate is best, quick is good, pretty soon is good.
Training. You talk to the city manager and try and say, geez, it seems like these are taking a long time, Bob, or Mr. Bellman comes in and whoever the FOIA requester is says, it seems like it's taking a long time for this to go. What's the problem? But as long as he's in compliance with state law, I don't think you've got to stand on it, quite honest.
But
And
okay,
I don't know that we should be in a posture where we're going to run contrary to state law and deciding we're going to shorten timeframes or anything, because we have a city Mr. Bellman has a city to run, and we're in a budget crisis. We don't have at least from my perspective, I don't have the city manager's job, but as Jonathan points out, you have a FOIA request that comes in, it often requires legal review. We don't have anybody to hire that's just going to do nothing but FOIA work. They could sit around on their hands for 3 weeks doing nothing, and then they all of a sudden have to go find documents. And the idea that we provide them for nothing you know, running a copy of today's agenda would be lovely, and that's no big deal. But if you have to detail an employee to do an extensive investigation, and like you're saying, try and anticipate what somebody wants out of all of this seems to be highly impractical and a complete, you know, complete abuse of governmental resources. We don't have that kind of stuff. You want a research librarian to do that, that's fine. But I don't see where the city has an obligation to just sit down with somebody and say, could you tell me what you're doing? Oh, maybe we could find that over here, or maybe we could do that. That's preposterous.
Let me just see if I could reply to that just briefly, and then I'll let you get to your debate. That's exactly the posture that the city now has. The phrase that you used, something like not quite violating state law, that's exactly how people view the FOIA now. The FOIA, it tells us how to do it, stall it to the last day. Okay,
Excuse me, Mr. Grebner.
it is.
If there's nothing that they are doing that is in violation of state law.
That's exactly, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just let me finish my public comment, but that's exactly right. It's not in violation of state law. If you answer the thing tomorrow, you're not violating state law or transducing state law or abridging state law. You're doing what you should be doing. And the charter has the power to direct the city to provide better service. Now, in general, it's going to take just as many staff minutes to provide it on the 20th day as it does tomorrow. In some cases, that won't be true, and so you have to build in a language here to make it reasonable, when it's possible, in general. I mean, you use phrases like that, but you're not going to reduce staff time.
I think the issue I'm having is that you're presupposing that nothing is happening on day 1 through 20.
I can tell you, as a person who has a great deal of experience with the city of East Lansing, that my FOIA requests sit and they wait to the 20th days. And so did Alice Drager's, and so do a lot of other people's. I can tell you that happens, okay? That's not some sort of an exaggeration I can bet that if I send in 3 FOIA requests in December and they were not responded to until I have to count it out. The President's Day, Martin Luther King or something came up, and so there was maybe a 1-day discrepancy. The charter amendment and the implementation of the charter amendment, and whether people were having issues with the charter amendment, and whether housing officers had run into problems with the charter amendment, and whether tickets have been issued under the charter amendment.
So you're not going to get whether people are having problems, because that's just like an interview sort of thing. But you're requesting what tickets. So to me, like, I hear that and I'm like, well, maybe we need a housing committee that gets that information at a monthly basis, and then that's all in an agenda. A packet, you know what I'm saying? So I think the solution, I totally hear what my co-committee member is saying about, and I'm an operations person, so what does this look like in the office? I also know you can't legislate a good attitude. You can't legislate helpful. So what we're looking at, I would suggest the city put as much out just by process automatically. That goes into this meeting packet automatically. Every proposal goes into the planning committee packet, and then it's all there. And then maybe redacted police reports, or maybe the police reports have a special, it sounds like they're doing a quicker turnaround. Maybe that becomes kind of a micro, but it's few things. FOIA should be rare. What is it, rare, whatever. FOIA, it seems to me that we should be operating in a way where FOIA requests are rare, because most everything anybody would want is publicly available through Open Meeting Act documentation. And if it isn't, then that becomes, hey, what if somebody having to FOIA? Let's get it in the packet.
Okay, I have Jeff, and then I have Rod's copies.
So what you just said is exactly the goal of this. That FOIA just provides the minimum of what the state has to do. What Mark said is we want the city to provide better than what the state allows. What you just said is in spirit of what's trying to be accomplished here, is that you don't have to fall back on FOIA because it's just the minimum. We expect more than the minimum, that's what we're trying to do. And to what Lynn and Jonathan had said about, what people have stuff to do, of course. And the second part of that 8.1, Jonathan, was consistent with protection of personal privacy, economic administration, and restrictions imposed by state or federal law. So the goal of this, again, is to provide better transparency for you. When you get down to 8.4, with the cost, Jonathan, you had made a suggestion last time about how we have to combine. I thought it agreed with you basically that maybe that word should change so that if for some reason there's a request that's difficult and needs to take time, you do that. You can fall back on FOIA. But I don't think that if Mark's saying, this is what I've heard from other people, that should be the posture of the city, that we're just, let's do the minimum we have to do on the law. That's frankly kind of a cop out. Good service from the government.
But that's an accusation that unless you know what's happening in the, I
Not an accusation. Let me finish. You've had your chance. Let me finish. It's not an accusation.
We've heard my chance.
Well,
What
no,
are you talking about? I've had my chance.
No, you can talk, you can say something next. I'm just finishing here. I mean, and then you throw me off what I was saying here, but it's not an accusation, it's like a hostile accusation. Everyone just said, you sort of said it, and then just said it, that you could just take the time on FOIA. That's what's happened. It's not accusation. That's just how a lot of governments operate, because that is the law. That doesn't mean that we can't do better than that. So, Mark, I appreciate you coming here tonight. I think the two things that I'm getting, one, I think we need to improve transparency. That should be the goal. We should submit something from this committee to the council that at least tries to improve transparency. It's up to the council to modify it, adopt it, reject it, whatever. Let's try to do something. So the two concerns that I hear the most are that maybe city employees are going to be too busy to do something, or the costs. So do you have any thoughts on just this issue of employees being too busy? Or is this really burdensome? I think the quick question is like, is it burdensome? And then secondly, this idea, if we're trying to provide information free of charge to the public, is that much difference than what happens under FOIA right now? For example, like I've submitted requests to the city clerk, which could be treated as FOIA, but sometimes I'll get the information, I don't get charged. Now in the past, I've got some letter I meant to find where I was told it was going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars from East Lansing. And this is in a situation where I was like Alice Dreger, I was digging into something that people didn't want me to see. And that's the response I got. And that troubles me when you bring up that a journalist is trying to find information and they're be given the runaround because you can use a statute to do that. That shouldn't be the posture of the city. I think there does need to be some, like the idea is there needs to be some public policy to increase transparency. And that's the goal here, understanding that people are raising concerns which are reasonable, but all those concerns ought to be able to be addressed. Sorry if that's kind of run on for you, but if you had any other thoughts.
If I can just respond to many requests, every request is a request under FOIA because you don't have to cite FOIA to be a FOIA request. So if you walk in and you pick up a copy of the agenda and you walk out with it and you just took it off the desk outside the clerk's office, that was in effect a FOIA request and it was satisfied instantly and nobody had to file one and they didn't wait 20 days. Okay. Now, if something isn't in that category and you had to write it down and somebody says, oh, that should be a FOIA request, they don't have to do that. But if they do that, that diverts you into this channel that in East Lansing, unless somebody is awfully nice about it, you are now on the 20-day plan and you're not going to see that thing because it's going to go to the city clerk and 20 days later, you'll get your document. Might be faster, but a lot of them go that way. And that's including pretty trivial things. Okay. It is rare. Okay. I was going to say it's rare for there to be substantial requests are very rare. They're just a handful a year. Requests that actually require a lot of staff time to fuss with. And I guess the best you're going to be able to do there, where the city actually has to spend time, is to basically charge enough for the request that it discourages a frivolous request. You want to discourage them So that, but the point is, if you charge somebody $5,000 instead of 30,000, they're just as discouraged. 5,000 is plenty of discouragement for the average person who's making a request. But the city shouldn't, there ought to be a policy that basically you do the best you can to provide it at low cost. And that's mainly because when the Alice Dragers of the world come along, you ought to see especially media requests as being something that's favored. And so you ought to favor them with a reduced cost. Okay. Now, if a handful of requests are commercial in nature, they're commercial and they are valuable to the person making the request. And in those cases where they have no public policy implications at all, it may make sense for the city to charge full freight. But other requests where it's really just somebody who's angry that his basement flooded or wondering how come the neighbor was allowed to build an extension or whatever, I'm that kind of a, not exactly public policy, but a real person with a real dispute. I'd say in general, the city ought to err on the side of undercutting, of understating its cost. So
But what about the cost being based on staff hours? How much that costs the city to do the work?
the city, that's right. The city is allowed to charge a maximum, but you can charge half of that, 2/3 of that or whatever.
You just become charging what it costs them to do the work.
You can,
Suggest differences.
Well, I understand that.
You're not
No,
gonna
no.
agree because you both.
But no, it's not an agreement or a disagreement, except for the idea that we're very concerned about a punitive charge that becomes a restriction on releasing data. So we see this request, we don't want to release this information, so we make it exceedingly expensive, which is a ploy that has been used. And not here, but it's a FOIA issue. Versus the idea that we're giving some requesters a discount.
Right.
As opposed to just saying the city is charging what it's going to cost the city to fulfill this request.
Right.
Well, and a lot has been covered of what I would have said, but you know, what I'm hearing when we talk about state law, and we also, you know, all of the concerns of how with staffing, for instance, and ways that responsiveness has not always been sooner than that 20 days, for instance. What you're asking of us is to look at language that would be more in that spirit of responsiveness, that where applicable, possible, feasible, that the city be unique to what I'm hearing most other cities maybe don't do either, which is to be, if we can, give more timely FOIA responsiveness, that be considered, and that be a mindset change.
that it be the policy of the city to try to do that. So, you know, that's all I'd ask. And by the way, a lot of little municipalities are extremely friendly because it's just their neighbors. Yeah.
But you know, how do they're publishing our FOIA data? How do you know?
Yes,
Where does that get published? The city of East Lansing, all the FOIA requests are published?
it's
somewhere?
buried in there, but every FOIA request and all the responses are there if you just dig deep enough and
They're on the
keep
city.
searching. Yeah.
I'm gonna give Jonathan the last question that I have.
I saw a news article at Alice J over the weekend reported that the RNC is suing the city of Lansing on FOIA grounds. And I have concerns that the proposed 8.4 here would open up the city of East Lansing to similar suits, especially where, you know, I don't think that that East Lansing is the RNC's favorite. So do you not have any concerns that if we say in general, the public should be given access to public records and information without charge? And that way, charging cost to requester is necessary, the city will err on the side of proving the information at the lowest reasonable cost? Do you not have concerns about that language then being quoted back at the city by a bad actor or what some would view as a bad actor to say, why aren't you giving this for me for free? Or why aren't you giving this to me for $500 instead of $4,000? I'm going to sue you under your own language, under the language of your own charter and then make you put in all of those man hours, that legal costs and all of that, to say I'm doing this over when I saw the number that the RNC was suing the city of Lansing over, I thought there must be some zeros missing, and I don't think there were. So there, you know, if we have actors going after city governments over 4 digits, aren't you concerned that this language is gonna then come back and be used against the city, over what is essentially a nuisance suit, but using our charter language against us?
Remember that the FOIA, the state FOIA provides for the recovery of attorney fees. And so the suit against the city or the city of Lansing is probably premised on the idea of recovering attorney fees by prevailing in the suit, okay? This would not be part of FOIA, part of the state FOIA. And so it wouldn't really, they wouldn't recover fees for a suit under this. Furthermore, this language, as I propose it, wouldn't be sufficiently clear that you would have an access, you'd have a right to mandamus, nor is it a
Then what's the
right.
point of it?
That's what I'm saying.
Then what's the point?
That's.
The point is that if you're actually asking me, the point is that the city charter sets the broad framework and the attitude of city government, that the posture of city government. And if the posture of the city government starts out that it is friendly and provides access, that's a lot better than the current situation. And that it should do what it can to provide documents, and it should not think of running out the clock. If running out the clock is not the city's policy, that would be a big help, okay? It's still a soft requirement, but many of the requirements in the charter are such soft requirements. I'd be happy if you did this, but
Respectfully, for all the years of service you've given in the government and in your volunteerism, I thank you for that, because there aren't many people that last that long in these kinds of roles. So hats off to you on that, and for being my representative. However, I will also say, Angel Grabner, we are appreciative of having someone come and give us some information at the charter committee, because we want to have these kinds of conversations, and that makes whatever we decide a little more comprehensive, because we've taken into people who have cared about this kind of stuff have come forward, and we can process that and come up with our decision. So I want to thank you. You're one of the angels, one of the few angels that have come here. So thank you.
most welcome. And I thought I was going to get told it. I have many stories. I won't tell you any, but I recently appeared before the Historic District Commission at a public hearing, made a statement, was cut off 4 times in 8 minutes. And it was so bad that Bob Bellman himself heard about it, telephoned me to apologize for how I was treated by the Historic District Commission. So I was expecting almost the same reception here. And I just appreciate being slightly appreciated. This is much better. Thank you.
So I'm going to say one thing that we need to is, I think attitude, and it shouldn't be the charter that comes around and has to foster that. We should demand that as council members, citizens, to have the city manager be the one that leads that charge. So that's my philosophy, and if they aren't, we as citizens need to come forward and say that.
Like that's just down to the left.
So we have some time to think of this before, Ruben, you didn't get a chance to speak, so go ahead.
I appreciate what you just said, but I also appreciate what he said, and that is that the charter says framework. So we do have a role in this, and whether we like the term immediate or not, we're gonna have to wrestle with it.
Yeah, I think that this gives us, this gives us time to think about that before we get to that item on the agenda. Go ahead. You didn't have a chance either.
Yeah.
And then Jill gets one too.
I was just gonna add, and I agree with the idea, like, even in my view, like transparency is more than just posting a link on a website, like you need that culture of service and transparency of like helping people get what they need, like at the local level.
There are 2 things. One, I would hope that the extension would be unusual, not usual. Maybe there are additional steps someone else had. That may make all the difference. The second one, I think we need to break this out into the 2 kinds of documents we're talking about. I think it just needs to be transparency on minutes, agendas. This is what it is. Then everything else. Because this is so combined, apples and oranges. And I think
It needs to be, that's my
Yeah,
recommendation.
but all
Then we
budgets are
have
in
two, right, then we have two categories, the stuff that's readily available, that will be at the library. And all the things we talked about, then the things that are not read, or not
Right.
currently, or cannot be. But we're talking about all documents in the same format, and I think that is gonna be confusing no matter how.
So that'll be our discussion when we get to that part of our agenda. That's actually later on. So I think everybody's had a chance. We can think about this and, something might come to mind as well. Is there anybody else that wants to speak during our public comments? Nope. So we'll close item 2.2 and we'll go from the committee members. Anybody have anything they want to add? Okay. New business, review of the public comment from our last meeting. We had none, so we don't have to review that. Review of the proposed modification from 7 to 14. None of that came forward last week except for the things that we have before us. So we're going to move on to chapter 15. It's a new chapter we're going to look at, and then chapter 16, and then we'll go back to our new business. Yeah, we're going to continue this discussion at that time. So chapter 15, this is contracts, franchises, and permits. And I'm just going to start off by saying, if you get to the very end under miscellaneous, it talks about these chapter headings are not part of the chapter sheet, are not part of the charter, which I thought was sort of interesting. Because when you read this contract, and Mr. Bowman isn't here tonight, but he had said that there were contracts that the city manager made that never went before city council. And when I kept that in mind through this time because he had arrangements, and I know there were contracts with each of the senior level people in city government at the city hall. And they didn't come before council. And it seems like this chapter 15 is really written for contracts that come before from outside sources, not from people that are making them on personnel. So even though the heading isn't that, isn't part of the charter, according to the miscellaneous at the end of the charter, it still doesn't, it seems like it addresses for outside sources and bidding and things like that. And so when we get to 15.3, that's when it talks about everything has to come before city council. Well, they do come before city council and they have to approve these contracts and they have gone through the city attorney by the time they go through that. But that select group of contracts that the city manager might have made with people within the city staff, I don't know that that was envisioned in this part of the charter.
Is that coming from the council?
No, it hasn't.
So,
But when you read this whole chapter, it never really kind of refers to that kind of contract.
Question about franchise. What's the definition?
Well, I have that on there too. Okay, what's the definition of a franchise? We had a franchise, I believe, at one point in time with the people that were doing web service and all of that. Yeah. But it was a specific one for the web access and stuff. I think.
Sometimes a cable.
Yeah, cable, yes. And I don't know what we have now, and maybe we need Mr. Bellman when we go through this to explain, because I have a lot of these questions here, like, yeah. I have cable down here, I have a definition of franchise, and no franchises are grants. So we don't really talk about grants in here, just threw that word in there in the middle of it. On 15.5, well, Board of Water and Light is utilities in chapter 16. So I'm just asking if anybody else had any questions that maybe we could get answered, and maybe our lovely attorney Ann would be able to tell us what it means by it, because if you had some concerns, but for my main concerns on this.
That makes sense too, because cell tower issues, that if they had fallen under the use of streets by utilities, but then they were not identified as utilities. So they find that interesting, so that the franchise people, whatever.
Well, and the cell towers that we had throughout the city during my term of office, they came and wanted to buy them away from the city. And so they paid a huge amount of money to the city to purchase them. So they would maintain them, they would do everything with them. And under the IRS guidelines, it had to be attributed over so many years. It couldn't just come in as a lump sum, like some had hoped, when they were looking for ways to make money when city 2008 stuff about what was going on with the budget and the new changes in the IRS rules. So I think we need to have some more information, but maybe if you have any other questions, we can let Mr. Billman know that ahead of time so we can come back with it, so we don't spend another meeting just asking questions.
We expecting city manager or Meadows to be here tonight, or?
Mr. Meadows had some surgery, so he's not here. And you said he was not.
Yeah, Mr. Belvin. I think he's might be out of town.
So,
We just put this aside.
do you have any questions that we can make sure that he's going to be prepared to answer
Cell tower.
this whole section?
Right, the cell tower, the cell tower controversy and any clarifications that we might put in here, or if this, you know what I mean, like that seems to be all new ground and maybe articulating whatever decisions were made or reflect on that. And then my other thought of reading this too, keep going back to 8, was the idea that there does sound like there's some mandating of contracts being public in terms of coming into city council packets. Also, maybe they go to the planning committee. You know, it seems like some of this wording could have been made public by being presented at meetings.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of personnel contracts that were done that didn't come to city council, that were made with people just signing them past years. And so I think that he was surprised that there were some out there that didn't go before city council. So maybe the previous people always thought this applied to just businesses. And so I think this is a good flag for us to flesh out. So, okay.
It would never occur to me this was labor contract. To me, this is business contract.
Business contracts with consultants and business contracts.
With a consultant
Or
is
consultants or construction.
Right, external.
Yeah, all those things, not our labor.
Charter address labor besides, do we have any labor contracts? Because I know Dr. Wilkinson Johnson brought up some labor, you know, looking at diversified leadership and that sort of thing, but I don't think we've come across any, you know, like we will pay a fair wage or this city, you know, we don't have any verbiage like that.
that would be an ordinance, because that's never been in this charter, but it's a good conversation to have with him. And I don't think the library is going to take our whole 2 hours or 2.5 hours next time. And that's all we have on the agenda. So let's just move that one to the next one.
I'd say I think 50.3 does clarify.
Yeah.
But I think what Jill said, I'm just reading this, I mean, pretty plain language, it says a contract is definite party for any purpose, whatever, so I mean, I could be interpreted.
The rest of the whole thing is more geared to our non-labor things. And I think that's, we exactly have to clear that up.
Yeah, it says contract.
But it was chosen to be interpreted in a way that would be more clear.
Yeah.
That's what we hear, not answering.
Clarify.
Yeah.
All right. And let's go to chapter 16. Municipal utilities. Anybody have any questions on this?
I had an observation on 16.3, surprise, but I know that some cities will not shut water off. There is some deliberation about whether there's an inhumanity in water shut-offs. So because we're saying we have the right to shut off the water. I hear you, but I'm just saying, I just want to put that out there. There's a number of cities in Michigan
Sure.
that have determined that that is not something they're gonna do, that they're worth to get people's water, that, you know, so.
And they charge you extra when they shut you off. Put door tags, you know, right?
And charge a fee.
Okay, so like that, anything else? All right,
That's something we can get more information on prior to the next meeting. What, right, I don't know if they're not.
Well, they just won't shut water.
Right, but what that language looks like and things like that.
Oh, yeah,
So that seems like something worth discussing.
sure.
we can ask Mr. Bellman to look at that. I got that on my list and Grace is catching that in minutes too.
There was,
And what the procedures are,
And procedures, language and procedures from other communities too.
or even our own. I think we do a lot of work before.
Oh, yeah, no, I hear
We
that.
need to hear
Yeah.
this.
I don't know anybody who's ever,
Yeah.
so, but I was struck by that wording.
And is there a policy in our city of how they process it so that everyone's doing it the same way?
We get called ahead. What are the current?
Yeah, but I would also wonder about some of the, you've often mentioned that we don't know if it went before city council, if it went before planning commission or something like that. If we could get any kind of historical background on how this language was formed at that time, because some things have progressed since. And kind of just an idea of where we were when we wrote this.
Yeah, and mandate, maybe mandate that they show up at meetings, that is going to this packet. This accounting information will be included in the next county, the next committee meeting, but,
well, isn't the council, I wish Mark was here, council is discussing trying to get a voting member out of Board of Water and Light board. So I don't know if we,
Oh, we had one before too. I probably saw that in the article, but we did have one before, but I know he could say his piece, but he had no.
yeah, I'm
Not
just
very
wondering,
frustrating.
is there something we can do in this chapter that, I don't know, maybe we say if utility is services people in Lansing, it's not some sort of way to force the Board of Water to give us a voting representative or something. If we consider the community, we should have, say, I think I sent this around, prior, there was also talk about the city of Lansing, Board of Water and Light would prioritize people in the city of Lansing. So like, we would be left out, that there's an emergency measure, so. I don't know, some bachelors actually come along, these Lansing gets cut off, Lansing doesn't. Things like that, if there's some way for us to build in some, council clouds or accountability or protections, it's probably looking at. I don't know.
Possibility.
I think I have the word.
Yeah, oh, yeah, we have quite a few. We got an advisory board member. He was an attorney and he pushed hard.
The city of Lansing is the owner of the Board of Water and Light.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Which is why there are people have heard of it.
So let's leave the library out because we can do these other two things. These other three things that we have on the agenda, and let's not go into the library because I'm anxious to see what Kevin King comes back with how he wants, how they might suggest amending this and let them know the date and time of the meeting. And as we look through the charter, they're really just there's 15 places that city library is mentioned, and 15 of them are in the chapter 17. So 15 are in chapter 17, 13, and then we have 6.5 that the charter is available, which we've already talked to, and we got some response back from him and from Pam too. And then this, and I also heard from the previous library director that there was information about where all that was in the library that was left for the library, the new library director, but there was an interim, and so it might have gotten lost in the transition. And then 7.6, which we're still working on, which is the city attorney's opinions. So there's only two places that we would have to deal with this otherwise. Jefferson, the library, whether we name it city library, the Lansing public library, whatever. So that would be, those are three items will take up our meeting probably next time for discussion. So let's see if we can finish up this whole business. Going on to 4.1, which is 7.12, and brought us back. And this is the section on our ethics and nepotism. And she included the current definition of family that we have. And does that meet everybody's concern and coverage of we want to operate here? Seeing nothing, so is there a motion to approve this new language? Moved by Tina, supported by Wilkerson Johnson. Discussion on this?
Just wanted, before we vote, the language, a person who's related to an official or employee, where we're largely focused on officials in the bulk of the section. I'm wondering the addition of or employee, want to make sure that doing anything that accidentally encompasses more people than we need.
Yeah, that's good. So my son's an employee, make, 10 hours a week. So does that, there be a conflict of interest with family members of children that work in the pool?
I just want to make sure we're not accidentally saying, two spouses can't work in the city through that language, when we're really saying to say, the spouse of the council member can't.
The top part says city manager.
Right.
Council member.
So that's the offering of the city.
No, I mean, what do you want it taken out? I mean, it doesn't, I just want to know.
I think, but I'm not entirely sure.
It's one of those things like you could have a department head and they fire their child, that's questionable. Or this is flawed. And brings to more people like totally innocent. A couple, I'd say a couple.
That's what I mean.
Right. And how many, the idea,
There are many
how many would
relatives.
this practice now?
There are many relatives that work in the city.
Yeah, it's too small not to.
But are department heads accountable to the city manager?
Yes.
So like, could they potentially like handle any issues like that? If it comes up like, hey, like, what are you doing over here? Like if there's an accusation of like, something like that, it'd be like to me, it's like some sort of staffing issue of like,
That first sentence, what you said, Jack, kind of applies to the last sentence. It's just the council member, council and the city manager. It's not to the other people.
Well,
So then do we need,
I'm sorry, Jonathan, I was thinking they could be changed this to the addendum to a person who is related to a council member or city manager as spouse or as any of the following, so that it's clear that those are the people that we're concerned about.
I think that captures what we intended.
Yeah.
That's not a thing. That heard it later on.
Council member or city manager?
Yeah, just any person who is related to any council member or city manager, spouse, or as any of them following with the recitation of the groups there.
Right, so you want to move that, Jonathan, with that correction?
Yeah, I'll move to make that correction.
There's a second. Make the correction. So we got that. Any more discussion on that? Okay, for the vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Okay, we got that one. Next is our 7.2. 7.12. Our 7.2 version.
That's what we just mentioned. Moving to 1.2.
Okay, so our next one is a continued discussion on chapter 8. Got a lot of comments on this.
So I think there's a lot of points where we do all agree here, even if it doesn't seem like it. I think those points where we agree is that state FOIA is the floor, not the ceiling. And I think we can agree on that. And I think that's an important point that to point out that we all agree on that. But where I run into my roadblock here is kind of what Mr. Grevner, the last thing that Mr. Grevner and I discussed, which is that what he said is that, I suppose he's right, is that there's no cause of action here, where none of this could be used to initiate suit against the city. And if that's the case, then a lot of, I think, the language in 8.4 particularly, it particularly sounds in statutes. It sounds like you're making laws there, making policy that has to be followed, and where there has to be consequences or the ability for consequences if it's not followed. So that's where I'm kind of struggling, particularly with 8.4, where if someone's not able to bring a cause of action against the city, if the city is not following it, then what's the purpose of it? Especially where it seems to be that language creates law that the city must follow.
I also have concerns about that. I agree with Jonathan, and to me, when I read the first two sentences of 8.4, it says the public to public records and information without charge, but then in the next breath, it says where charging costs are necessary. So it seems like it's internally inconsistent and allows a great deal of discretion that could cause a lot of problems and conflicts just in trying to enforce any sort of consistency or whatnot by whoever's making the FOIA decisions here. I think it's inviting a problem where I think that there isn't, or doesn't need to be. And especially in light of the fact that Mr. Grevner has conceded that there's no cause of action that could arise out of this. I don't see any reasoning in potentially creating a problem that's.
I would like to see some wording around be charged is justified by a quote of hours required. So if I get a FOIA request, I can say, this is going to require me looking at this many documents, this is not, so if, like we always do as consultants, I'm estimating this is going to be 87 hours. So, and I can justify that by saying, this is how I justify those hours. So if I've got FOIA, getting like FOIA that's going to cost more than $100 or something, you have to say, what are you doing to justify those hourly? Well, how come, it's going to take 18 or whatever. So then you could justify, I'm not a lawyer, but I would say, oh, well, that's why you were charged this. That is the same rate that this person was charged asking for a similar document, because we're just recouping our costs. We're not being punitive. We're not being judgmental. We're not choosing somebody's getting charged more. This is the estimate for hours to do this work. This is why it's costing that.
And I guess just to build off what Lynn was saying, just because just because there is no cause of action here doesn't stop people from trying. So there's that problem too, where, and then we're all of a sudden devoting many hours, because they're attorney hours, on fighting that, what is a nuisance suit, and over something that Mr. Grevner has acknowledged isn't in his mind, something that's supposed to be creating laws that have to be followed, but instead creating policies that should be what animates the city's decision making. But so unless we were to specifically add a section to say that this does not create a cause of action, that this, which, I don't,
That still wouldn't preclude anyone, but right.
that's a good point. It would make it a lot easier to slap down, but still wouldn't preclude somebody. I struggle with 8.4 specifically for that reason, because it sounds like when I'm reading this and someone with a lot of experience in doing this type of stuff, I read that and say, that sounds like the basis for a lawsuit.
Yeah, because it's so big. Error on the side of what?
Well, and no, not because it's so vague, but because it's so specific
Oh, see, I see.
in my mind, because it looks like you're not just creating broad policy directives, but you're saying, here's the exact reasons why you can do something. And so
Right.
that's where I run into those issues.
So we talked a lot about kind of the buzzwords of posture and tone, and timeliness and transparency. And if all he was really asking for was just kind of that mindset change of we're going to, where possible, be more timely or more transparent. I mean, are we going to just kind of do that as a framework and leave it alone? Or are we going to get more specific and then run into problems that you mentioned? So that's what I'm struggling with this. This is kind of just an exercise in making us see more attentive.
Or I'd like to see it be a way to manage it.
That's was
Dr. Johnson, I think what this does is sort of what you said, it causes the city to be more attentive to direct, if you're in the city, if you're Bellman, or you're talking to someone, say, listen, policy expresses charter, we're trying to be transparent. Typically, to your point, if you do submit FOIA and the city has to do much work on it, they will give you an estimate of that staff hours, correct?
Yep.
You'll be told what it is and the cost, if you got an option to move forward with that. Sometimes you'll get a letter that says it's going to cost you $50,000.
Well, that's what he's saying. I'll
Say,
figure it
I'll
out.
stop.
I haven't seen one that high ever in all my FOIA experience, but no, they do have, it has to be if there's a $50 deposit. And the law itself does say that you're supposed to charge it at the lowest possible rate. So say for some reason I work on something, but I'm redacting it. I'm an attorney, but I'm not going to charge a attorney fee. Now, they will charge attorney fee if I have to analyze what, So that's in the state law as it exists now. And I don't know that everyone always gets the cost itemization, and I don't know exactly what East Lansing does. I know in my other cities, sometimes they do give stuff for free. But it, probably depends on how expensive it is.
I have a couple more.
Yeah.
So people are given that already. Whether this creates mandates or not, it's a clear legal duty. Again, there's no attorney's fees, there's nothing about a cause of action. Perhaps it would give someone the opportunity to ask, how many FOIA lawsuits does the city have against it right now?
I think we have at least one.
So I think the fear that there's going to be much lawsuits over this is overblown. There probably will be none, or one or two, and it all does still fall back on FOIA potentially as well. And there's none of these incentives like insurance fees or any of that stuff in there. Is it possible? Well, of course, it is. I don't think that it's, we should back away and try to be more transparent though, because someone potentially sue us over that. Yeah, one more point. I just looked through it. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. Ree doesn't work here. Our former city clerk was often a FOIA coordinator. There were many times, and this might rankle Pam, but I would email Marie for something and I would get a response that day. Or the next day, I'd ask if it was can you check my voter log? I'd ask for the voter files and I was never charged for them. And I got them right away. Now, there were other times I'd sent stuff in the past where I would get the letters and it was routine extension. So I know from my own experience, the city can have a more customer-friendly posture.
Can I just,
That's the goal.
where doesn't that start with who's in charge?
Of course it does. But to your point earlier, and I think this is sort of what Drew said, city manager will take this direction from the charter because he or she will know we're supposed to be, this community that I serve wants us to be customers, constituents, service oriented when it comes to transparency. That should be the goal. So I think there's some good points raised here. I also met with Councilmember Dana Watson the other day, and I discussed this with her. And, like probably every council member we've asked, they would say, yes, we want transparency, right? So she said, send it to us. She said, you don't have to have, we may ignore it, we may adopt it, we may tweak it. That's your role, not the council's role anybody. We're here to present ideas to them based on what we're. So whatever comes out of this discussion, I think we need to send something on the council. Doesn't have to be perfect. Still have concerns about it, and they can have this discussion. We can be back when we wrap this thing up here in a few months in June, maybe. And it'll be an interesting discussion for the council to say, yeah, this is great, this is horrible, this is a mixed bag, but we should present them with an opportunity to say yes or no, or something for transparency. So that's my thoughts on that.
It's nice on the side of the table. We can reference maintenance comments, which I like to. You can come back, you're.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I agree with this policy like overall in terms of like, making the city more transparent, but yeah, I do share the concern with 8.4, like that first sentence. In general, the public should be given access to public records and information without charge, period. Is like very declarative, like it goes on to say like, with the reasonable cost and everything, but that first sentence like alone is like very like, hey, in general, this should be free, basically, so that's like, as a citizen, I'm like coming in, like regardless of the burden on the city, it's like, hey, well, the charter says they should be free, like, that'd be my thing, like, obviously, like, there's the other laws in effect, but yeah, just going by that sentence alone, it makes it like very, I guess, like, when it turns out, like, oh, no, it's actually not, but it's like, I just think that sentence shouldn't be there, in my opinion.
So I agree with, I was saying, right, yeah, there. So I agree with Jeff that what we're doing here should signal to the city staff and city attorneys particularly that transparency is a goal and that the voters are saying transparency is a goal if they decide to vote for this and all of that. But I don't know if we accomplish that by doing such a specific by the specific language that we have throughout this. If we want transparency to be the goal, we can say, we can have a general or charter provision that says the city shall be transparent. And so that's kind of where I'm at when we get into exactly what that transparency looks like, which sounds policy. And again, once it's, what we've been talking about since last August, that once it's down and like, this is what we're doing in pen, not in pencil, right? And, the portions of 8.4, the portions of 8.5, go more into this is what the policy of the city should be and gets into, and here's exactly how it has to be done. And that's where I think that's the role of ordinance is rather than charter. And that's just my view of how we should be approaching this.
Right, Pam, then,
Okay.
and then,
Jeff mentioned that I had an issue with him, the story of him getting a quick call back and the information he was looking for. That is great, but everybody has to get it. And it can't be, the city, we now know all the city managers. So when I was arguing with Bremner about something, he's like, well, when I call the city manager, I'm like, oh, should I call the city manager? No, I should. He's got a job, right? So this needs to be, you don't have to like me. You have to give me this information. You don't have to agree with my group, but I have a right to this information. Because I'm glad that you told white men get all the answers, but I frequently had to have a right to be this, right? So that's got to be, this is the rule. You have to give me this. You don't have to like me. You don't have to be doing me any favors. Everybody comes in, they get the same thing. They get the same answer. They get the same data. That's why as much as we could get in agenda packets, get out there for people that want to look for it. You don't have to be doing anybody a favor. They don't have to know the city manager. They don't have to be friends with the clerk. None of that. So they can just come in, cold person. This is what you get. And that's what we want. I mean, here's what transparency looks like.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Martinez.
I guess I don't have the concerns with that first sentence. In general, is a qualifying term. It does not say that it's absolute. It's actually granting flexibility, saying in the main, this is the way it will go. And then it tells us that under certain circumstances, these charges can be imposed and so forth. What I am concerned is that there seems to be, well, we all know that there's organizational cultures and powers that are often used with discretion, right? I see it in the school districts all the time. It happens in the cities, it happens in the counties, certainly happening at the national level. What concerns me is that, we've heard tonight that, one person faces that institutional power and forces them to kind of push to get transparency, and others walk in and get what they want. So my concern is, and this is what she's asking about, we don't have standardized processes or protocols by which people are all treated the same, irrespective of what it is like. So if Gregor is being asked to pay all kinds of funds and others are walking in and getting documents, then we have a problem.
Did he really give specifics on what he wanted versus, what Jeff wants? All the stuff Jeff wanted from, that you've given examples to me and they're computerized. So it's very easy for her to go in to do that as a city clerk to pull that out. If it's something that is a little more different, going to the police reports, city clerk isn't the person that's going to be doing that. They're going to be sending it over there, and there might be some reasons behind it. And what he said about the charter amendment. We know the council was meeting on the charter amendment. So do they want to release, like, when is it going to be in the charter or whatever they were going to do when it was almost like there's pending litigation, even though there was no litigation. They were trying to decide, do we go forward with this? Is it clear enough? That wasn't anything that anybody could control except council. So that each of those things are such different things. And how do you put language in here that addresses that so it seems fair to all, so that Pam doesn't feel like, oh, they didn't do that for me.
So that's exactly what I think we're trying to do. The fallback is you get deployed. And that's just how everybody's treated. I've been treated that way, just to be clear. The reason I brought those examples to read is that it is possible at times for someone in the city to do exactly the opposite of what Trevor said, is just like immediate response. Like Pam Will sends an email in, 3 hours later, someone can get it to you. They should try to do it. Not because they're friendly. Everyone should get that access. And I also sued Marie a couple of times. We used to not be buddy. And she would still reply pretty fast, actually. But there were other times, I faced both sides of the approach. So it should be standard. It shouldn't matter who you are. I 100% agree with you. And that's the goal of this. And Dr. Martinez, I used the point, in general language is qualifying. The goal is to try to get people to experience what I experienced. Quick turnaround with easily accessible computerized information that is not burdensome for someone to provide. And when it's not the case, then you have these fallbacks. And I'm sorry, I think there's one other point here I want to make to what somebody said. The specifics that Jonathan's raised, and what you raised, if you don't put something specific in here and it's just fluffy, then it won't really direct anyone to do it. Having the specifics in there, you are encouraging the culture to change and respond in a very specific way. Take up the 7.6 section of our charter about city attorney opinions are supposed to be in the library, never been complied with. At mandamus, maybe someone could file mandamus with that. Same situation.
I don't know that they're not at the library. That's what I was just about to say. Because Kristen was
And which one, right? So I'm saying you could find different instances in here where maybe something's not being filed, maybe some. If we can certainly try to make that more clear one way or the other, but if we just go back, when we first started this conversation, our original draft was, we're just complying with state law, and everybody said that doesn't do it. So we need to do more. Yeah, I think you recall
about the intent. We talked about
Well,
sending the message that it is just.
and Jonathan, you said the exact opposite a few meetings ago, where Mark Meadows said, we don't need to have this intensity. You said, well, I think we do have clear message. I don't want to.
I'm agreeing, no,
Said
to
exactly.
be clear, I'm agreeing with you that we need to have a message about transparency. I just think that when we get into all the specifics here, that's where I run into an issue.
Okay, well, I think without the specifics, fail to actually create some, the conditions for that to happen. But besides, sort of shrug and say, no, no.
Okay, so we have Lynn, Jill, Ruben, and then I think was you, John.
I think we get into trouble. Into trouble when we start trying to do things like with 8.4, because assessing cost is covered by state law. And I think we're a lot better just sort of adhering to state law policy under that provision. I agree with the move that we have towards transparency. I'm sorry. I also think that our state FOIA should be a floor, not a ceiling. But I'm wondering if I'm concerned about 8.2 and the attempt in here to create a new person or personnel kind of job description within this. I wonder whether we might consider doing something like tweaking 8.1 so that it's the policy of the city to provide access to the public to all information and possession, sort of our policy statement there. And then when we send this to council or send whatever we get to council, suggest to them that there be an accompanying ordinance that is adopted by the council that would set forth some of the criteria or the parameters that we're talking about here, perhaps in concert with some input from Mr. Bellman about identifying who the designee in the clerk's office would be to be the FOIA coordinator, identifying what documents would normally be put online automatically and which ones could go some other place, so that we're not burdening the charter with something, we're not confusing policy with implementation kinds of issues.
Jeff, did you misspoke before where you charge hundreds of thousands of dollars?
I one time requested some rental license information years ago, information on it, and I was given a letter saying it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to get information. I'll try to find it. This was like 15 years ago.
You just want to make sure that was.
Yeah, no, that's
I didn't hear.
thousands of dollars.
Yes, that doesn't detail it all.
I said it was gonna take thousands of, I mean, it was an attempt to stop me from getting.
Somebody else so.
Well, no, if it's not abused, it's not as estimate.
State that it's not to be used period.
I don't know.
Well, that's what the FOIA statute allows for that. The FOIA statute allows a person to sue and cover attorney's fees if they feel that their FOIA request is not being met in good faith. I don't know the exact language of it, but that's the essence of it. That's what RNC is doing to Lansing right now. So there are mechanisms. I don't know the specifics
So
of just.
Jeff could have sued if you chose, because it seemed like an outrageous deterrent.
But until last time I requested information, I said, yeah, I've never. Might take a couple weeks, something, but.
Hey, Jill.
Yeah, I have trouble with 8.4 for a variety of reasons. Because of any university could ask for the most complex thing in the world, and this looks like we're gonna give it to them. Now, my recommendation is that we do take this out and just say that the information will be provided at the lowest cost. Instead of so specific spelling it out, because I can see 5 universities asking for 5 different giant projects. They read this and, we just lost a month's worth of some employee's work. So, I know we think it's general. I know some people think it's specific, but I just see some real problems with it being spelled out like this. And I think we can make the same point without being.
So let me just interject here. There is FOIA policy in addition to the FOIA of the government. Do we have a FOIA policy in the city of East Lansing?
Something on the website. There's a website where you can put in your request, as an introduction paragraph.
Okay, so let's ask Mr. Bellman if there's a policy that dictates how we follow what we do in our city, because we should know that, because that would be a starting point for looking at how that's gonna mesh with the charter, whatever we put in the charter. Okay, got that, Grace?
Gave us the verbal stuff at
Yes,
the last
and the
meeting. And it sounded like the extension was unusual. Not the point that we got today that the extension is common. Because we need him to explain that, because if those were completely conflicting things I heard.
And I would say, on my time on council, there were a lot of times they did it to the end. There wasn't anything that the council members were in control of, because you don't hear about it until someone like Jeff brings it forward and say, I've been waiting for this or that. We're just assuming they're operating in that way, but there were times I know that they were waiting till the last minute, or even maybe the attorney was just taking their time, and that isn't how we want to. That's why I keep saying it starts here. The person has to be directed. Maybe now that's what's happening because we have a different city manager that sees it differently. But again, I know that they were doing that before, and it didn't feel good. When we find it out, it's too late, as he was saying. So go ahead, Dr. Martinez, and then we got Dale and then Jeff. Oh, sorry, Jonathan. Who's next?
What I've heard is that the city lacks a proactive stance against them. And that we should have something that in the charter that provides a framework to try to facilitate a more proactive stance. And so I think that's what we're looking for, whether it goes in 8.1 or 8.4. I don't have a problem with 8.4 as an academic researcher. I don't think it's boxes and boxes of information. That's not the way we work. We have very specific research problems that we want to look at, and it's not something that requests everything. But I think we need to find language that urges or requires the city to be facilitated in addressing information.
Jonathan.
So I have 2 points. The first in response to Dr. Martinez regarding the language of 8.4. I understand, you're reading of it that in general, the public should be given access to public records and information without charge. I understand your view of it. Looking at it with a lawyer's eye, what I see is that it creates a presumption that the public, that anything that the public requests will be free, that the city would then have to defeat in order to charge something. That's how I read that language. And the way that this all gets resolved is through a lawsuit that's going to take time and money and headaches that I just don't believe are what's in the best interest of the city and the city's residents when it comes to how their money is being spent. And then the second thing was something Jeff said a while ago, that you have to create the framework. And I think we can look back to what we just passed, as 7.12, to show that you don't have to create a framework. The first sentence of 7.12 is that the council shall provide by ordinance for laws to secure ethics in government and to prohibit nepotism, which ordinance shall provide at a minimum that no relatives of the city manager or any council member should be hired by the city for any purpose during the term, et cetera, right? So at some point in a past charter provision or past charter amendment, the voters said the council needs to do this. And at minimum, when the council does this, has to provide that no relatives of council members or the city manager shall be hired by the state. And the council responded by creating an ethics and nepotism ordinance that looks at gratuities, that looks at political contributions, that looks at preferential treatment, that looks at the use of information, and that requires disclosure of any conflicts of interest. So when council went to look at this, they took the policy statement from the voters to say, we want you to create a code of ethics. And they created a code of ethics. They took the tone of what the voters required them to do, and they said, this is what the voters want us to do. We're going to do it. And we're not just going to do what they require us to do. We're going to go above and beyond that. And I think a compromise here is that we could do something similar, just say, within 1 year of passage of, of this charter provision, the city shall create a proactive transparency ordinance that accomplishes at a minimum these goals. And if we're not happy with what the council does, then we can go through a petition, the voters can do a petition to try to get an ordinance passed. Because we're gonna be making that easy, we're hoping to make that easier, as charter amendment process. There are other ways to do it without putting the exact provisions in the charter itself, which kind of locks in the voters to one thing or nothing. To what our view of it should be or nothing. We can say, let's let council have a crack at it, let's require council to have a crack at it. And then if we don't like it, there are other mechanisms, there are other things where the voters can do a piecemeal instead of saying, here's what it's gonna be, it's written in pen now, and we're gonna make it impossible or nearly impossible to change. So that would be my preferred way to do it, is to say, here's our goal. We want a proactive transparency ordinance passed within a year, and let council have it, and then go from there.
Very responsive.
I'll defer my time to Dr. Rubin.
I would just say Dale, because everyone's had a chance to speak once, we'll go back to the second speaker.
Yeah, I just had a couple of points. I do like that idea. I think there are some like overarching concepts that like should be enshrined in the charter regarding this. But yeah, then as we're getting more specific, I do think that's a good idea to defer to the council resolutions.
Resolutions or policies? Ordinances.
Ordinances. And then, yeah, I did want to address like also the idea of like, different individuals requesting this information, getting different treatment. Because like the example of like the editor of Eli was brought up. And that's like very concerning to me because that is like in and of itself, like almost like a public service of like having the media like sift through this information and then present it to the public. Because as the city, if you're just posting all this information online, like the common citizen won't be like, just sifting through documents, so like in their free time, trying to find it. Like they're gonna be like looking for like the media and relying on others to provide that information. And then the other point I wanted was the idea of having a deputy city manager as like a FOIA coordinator. And I think that speaks to the idea of having someone who's like at a higher level within the city to like make the decisions like more efficiently, like not having like a low level, like, intern or something who might not be able to get this information as fast as they need to in order to have it sent out. I need to be someone with like the power to actually say, hey, I need this and I need it now so we can get it out to the public.
Ruben or Jeff?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think if what we're hearing is that we have a bureaucratized process, right? And we want to get past that. I mean, I like the idea of being proactive and, sending a message like that to council, but I fear that the understanding of that term by council may not be what within the spirit of what we're talking about here. And it, in general, is narrowly understood in law, as you say, then give us another term so that we can meet the spirit of that sentence.
Right now.
Well, we can, that's the consideration. I'll be resting. I'll address that because I think that's what I was gonna say is one, if 8.4's first sentence is concerned, we can figure out how to deal with the in general for ACE, or we can figure out how to deal with without charge by qualifying without charge more. I do read this as that's exactly what we do after this, that it's necessary to charge. I thought maybe we could put language there of providing information at lowest reasonable cost, pursuant to state law, pursuant to FOIA, or something like that. We'll fall back on FOIA and charge whatever you charge and charge it. That's what you are getting. The circumstances we list, I was going to take Jonathan's suggestion and may combine, just say certain circumstances may justify. And then there is discretion in this. I mean, there's going to be discretion always. But these things we've outlined here, when we say don't be specific, this is policy to, try to provide this to residents first. We've also been talking, it's commercial, same thing, to help the media, like you said, that's a public service. We should be trying to do that. That was very, very helpful that I offered. That's how I would find out about what's really going on at the time. And we sort of don't have that from, but.
And you took that as the absolute truth, what was in there, right? From Eli?
No, but I think, the point of where I was going is that we have in here media representatives, so when there's media trying to get information what the city's doing and report it, that's generally journalism's public service. Protected by the First Amendment. It's good for us to get information. Of course, it could be biased or inaccurate, like it often is, but generally, I think we should encourage that. Same thing with the academic part. Dr. Wu made a good point. I married a researcher, and I know she's not off sent out FOIA requests to people for a bunch of stuff. That's not how it works.
We also write the budget that includes.
And then it's also our last clause is response requires substantial expenditure of funds or staff time at the city, which people kept raising. This is difficult or burdensome, then we just charge. So I don't worry about that at all. I think it is a good idea. I think it's a horrible idea to leave this to ordinance, but I do think we should include a clause which says that this can be, supplemented or something by ordinance as long as it doesn't conflict. That's not what article would say, but that the city should consider additional transparency measures by ordinance that don't conflict. That's actually a really good idea.
Can I ask you a couple questions about this?
Sure. Can I just make one more point to that? And then also, the deputy city manager, maybe that shouldn't say deputy city manager. Maybe that should say the city manager or a deputy city manager. Because like Diane, you keep going back to, well, this comes back to the city manager to set this up. So point is, I think Dale sort of said this and Mark Remersham said this, that somebody with some authority has got to have the power to send the message through the bureaucracy, be transparent, particularly when transparency is fair, effective, it's not burdensome, all the things. So, maybe that language tweak too, so that provides some flexibility. Sure, if you have any questions to that, Diane. So I also suppose that I say that, I come away with 5 or 6 different tweaks to this tonight. And I also would like to hear maybe from the clerk or FOIA coordinator to come next time we talk about this. And here, because even the stuff about the lawsuits or all these requests, like, or what Jill just said, what is the, how many, can you give us a stat? How many FOIA extensions are there on FOIA requests? Is that 70%, 90%, 10%? Then you can know a little bit whether you believe Mr. Bremer or not, but it's people. And that's true. Whether someone actually knows can tell you what that number is. But it wouldn't hurt to say, but I'd say I would come back to the next meeting, modify draft and just share it ahead of time and try to accommodate some of the concerns here. So that we can actually pay the vote on something, send it on to council. And I just find, sorry, Diane, I think one has some findings. Bringing in my mind what Jonathan said about let council draft an ordinance. I mean, our role is to give them a charter amendment. So let's give them a charter amendment. They can chop it up however they want. Let them make the argument it's good or bad or too specific or not, but they should. I think they should be put on the hot seat. Want your transparency or not? You want to define what that is or not? Let them do that. Let's send them something that actually tries to. Maybe this is the wrong word. Dictate transparency. They don't want to have transparency. Fine.
Okay, Lynn, why don't you speak and then I have some questions for everybody.
My suggestion might be, I broached the idea of having an ordinance thing. Is there, I think Jeff has a good idea. Either Mr. Bellman or whoever the FOIA coordinator is could come talk to this group next week. And I think it's possible for maybe us to craft a draft of the chapter here to add into the charter that it emphasizes our work on transparency, that we could send to council and not leave it to council to draft the ordinances, but send to council a set of ordinances to accompany, say, here's the charter amendment we're recommending, and we can currently recommend that you adopt these ordinances to effectuate the goals that this charter amendment is trying to achieve. And do it so that I don't know that we have ordinances that identify what our FOIA procedures are. But if we find out next meeting, we ask somebody to come here and tell them what they are, then we can, with some factual background, identify and draft an appropriate ordinance that would, maybe we can take some pieces about the information coordinators and match them with what Mr. Bellman's already got in place. And think about what an effective way of putting the ordinances in place might be. So that we do it a hand in glove kind of thing where we'd send to the city council as a package. Say, this is our goal and this is how we think you can best enact it. And that way we're not leaving anything really up to the discretion of city council, except for they can vote up or no and tweak it however they want to, but they can do that with anything we're sending to them anyway. We might stand actually a better shot at getting a broad policy goal, pass them to be in the charter, and then have accompanying ordinances that go with them. And let them, if they're going to fuss with anything, maybe they'll make minor changes to the ordinances and not the general policy. And ordinances will be easier to amend, we hope, than actually going back into the charter again. It's just a suggestion as to how to go about this with a more organized way.
So in that respect too, that could be something we could direct Mr. Bellman to put together an ordinance that addresses our, if we want to go that route, but also with hand in hand with this, with the chapter. So I'm gonna take a couple different people to question. My question last time was, do we keep the chapter 8 as it was saying the historical piece that was in there, that this was removed because it went to the city? You know how it says in there now, there's no chapter 8 because this was removed because we got the municipal court changed and the supervisors changed because our court system changed. Do we leave it there and then do we put this in as a renumbered one in transparency? Obviously, we'd all like it to be almost number 1 now, and we talked about preamble, but I think it does have to be a chapter when we talk about this because it's a concern that has arisen over and over. And I agree. When I was on council, that was a big deal because there were a lot of big issues going on. So I'm thinking that we keep talking chapter 8, but I just want to make sure that we don't lose that historical piece. Just like when we get to our last chapters, there's some historical stuff in there that talks about how we transition from the previous government to the new charter. And we don't want to lose that. I don't think when we get to the last chapters, it talks about aldermen's coming council members and stuff. So
Yeah, so just the reference, you talk about the references at the bottom to the number changes. We say something was removed, like some of them.
Just 8 and 9 were removed because we made big transitions in our court system, but in the back, it's on chapter 20, it's got miscellaneous, and then it talks about the first schedule. I mean, when we get to that, are we just gonna say, well, it doesn't apply anymore, we just remove it, or was it important to keep it in? So
it's important to train your
so
changes.
do we have its own chapter with its own number for this transparent? I'm just trying to
Yeah, I hear you. Like, do we rewrite 8 or do we make it
just say, just whatever number, renumber after, or do we make it at the end in a real strong state? So I have a couple of questions on this. So the on 8.1, when you said free and immediate access to the public, and then later on we go into this, we define it later in 8.4. It seems like we should take out the free and immediate access out of 8.1 if we're going to go into it 8.4. I'm saying this mostly to Jeff because if he's got any rights to
I
that.
think that's a good, that language should be, got it.
And then going to 8.2, if we talk about an information coordinator, we talk about what we just said about designating some person, the city manager will designate somebody, that this is the person that will be the managing this, not create a job description, and then ask the FOIA policy, whatever is the FOIA policy or whatever they're doing now, some of this stuff be placed in that policy, A, B, C, D, E. But that's cumbersome in the charter when we're just trying to get that somebody is going to be in charge of this, that they're designated this way. And then you talk about what you have in 8.2, not the letters that follow. And then when we talk about now we're kind of in 8.3, it talks about expedited access, which provides online and all of this stuff. I guess that's what we're already doing. And you put in your records of special interest to the public, including draft and adopted minutes of all meeting open to the public, plans submitted by developers, including analysis, and goes on to the rest of that sentence. But I just have a question on this. Draft minutes, if you put draft minutes out and people quote what was said, people don't have a chance to correct the minutes, and then someone's taking those minutes out there and doing it. So putting them out immediately, it gives the impression that this is what happened, and it could have been the person that took the minutes didn't quite capture it. And the rest of the body hasn't approved them. So I'm not sure draft minutes can be out there that early, immediately after a meeting, without causing some harm to us as individuals. That's just my thought on that. And the plans he inferred about, the plans submitted by developers, some don't get quite through. My history, and I know you've been on the planning commission too, is a developer brings plans into the city staff, and they sit down with city staff and they say, this is what we'd like to do. And city staff would say, well, right away, I can tell you that this is a problem, or this is a problem. And you don't know that this you have to go to the zoning board of appeals because you violated this. If you want to get it, you can't just get a condition put on there and you can't change it because this is the zoning issue. And then I also know that when they come in like that, they face a tougher battle. And sometimes they just go in to talk to them, to just say, what do you think? What would we have to tweak? I don't know that's the stuff that you put out there to somebody because they were coming in with an idea. They haven't formally submitted a plan, because once that plan is formally submitted, it becomes a public document. So I don't know that you want those things. And I mean, experience from what happens in the northern tier over the years. I mean, we were going to have a coffee shop a year ago. This man came and said, we're going to have, I think it was Pete's Coffee. It was one of those ones out west, Caribou Coffee. And he came to the neighborhood and asked that he went to the city and they said, go to the neighborhood. And they sat down and they redesigned the whole entry and exit way, because explaining to them, students live up here and this is this is what we see, how they're using the coffee shops. So you want to have it so it doesn't interfere with other businesses around there. And he came back with a whole different site plan. Now, he was just talking to the city. Do you want that out there and then people reacting, or do you want to have this, collaboration with planning staff who have this information? So that's the kind of stuff that I wasn't quite sure when they're putting this in there, that they want everything, when it's really the official documents are available. They're in the packet, as Ann has said over and over. So I would be really careful with what's in that one. And then the financial transparency. You've given me some information about how they hadn't done an assessment on a project until you brought it up. I thought with the law, with the TIF projects, they have to do all that. They have to give all that out. They have to give you the expansive over the time, because that's a requirement of you to have this TIF project. So I'm not sure if that isn't already being done. And so I would ask Mr. Bellman to talk to the plan staff and say, what in here is not being done? Because if it was a mistake by the planning department, a whole new planning department had no oversight for a while. I would like to hope that was the exception and not the rule, because this seems to be the policy that I've always found, and you found that they put out that stuff in that planning packet. if you're in the city council packets, if you're voting on money that you're gonna defer taxes, it kind of goes through a whole realm of people before it gets, and then, I point to Jill on this, and then the reporting. Don't they report that every year because they have to have it in there where we're at with how much TIF money was, how much relief was given to the developer this year, the first year, the second year, the third year of their TIF plan? Don't you have to show that someplace in an official document that's there for the public? Because how does the state, how does your finance person, have your finance department, they have to account for that, don't they? So I think that stuff is there. And so I don't know that it needs to be necessarily in the charter, but I just would think
Anyone would approve and not knowing the cost of the period of time. So I think it's not available. That's,
yeah, so, I think that's again where we have to have Mr. Bellman here and finding out from the, what is the process on these public projects that they have to have in place before they're approved. Because, when I was kind of shocked, but this is already done. And then you said that it wasn't, and I was like,
I mean, he confirmed it when I brought it up before, and I mean, it's documented.
but
Right.
why did it happen? Was it-
No.
Because that's-
So again, it's like, these things do happen, that's why it's stated that it's less likely that someone's gonna miss it. Someone says, oh, wait a minute, we're supposed to do that, but
That's pretty long, right? That's what you're saying. that-
Yeah,
So I mean,
you can't defer government, your tax dollars without having a plan.
One,
You know, a way to develop.
We may be talking about slightly different technical things than what you're saying is for. If I was agreeing with this, draft in is what you said is, you said it makes sense, but also I think, and I didn't draft, that was a Grevin thing. Yeah, it's about, there's times where things are moving fast and someone wants to know what was said at a meeting, and that's the best representation. It is a public document, it is available for you. Same thing with,
Draft minutes aren't under FOIA.
well, yeah, all the public records are available on FOIA. So even if it's incorrect, I mean, to your point where it could be incorrect, you're absolutely right. But if someone's trying to get something, right, the reason with expediency is that sometimes someone's trying to figure out, could be a court case, things, so I don't know, something fast where someone needs to see what was actually said. And that's all there is. And it's at that time. The planning and development documents, you said, same thing. If someone comes in with a limited plan, that's available. It's been cities, public records, so that stuff is, I get your points all make sense. Those things are already available under those.
If they just click for talk, if they will leave the plans.
If they don't leave the plans, then there's no document, but if there's a document, then it's.
Well, there could be a document that they could look at as a staff, I would say, and get some, the developer wants some feedback on this before we file our things. 'Cause when they pay that money, it starts the clock and they're starting their investment. And so there's lots of times when those people have met with you ahead of time. They've met with a member of council. This is what we're thinking. You know, is this go with the comprehensive plan? Do you see some problems with this? And people can say, well, I don't want to look at that. You just do it, through the system. I just want to get your opinion. Some people might react differently to it, but it's not an official thing. It's just, they're just trying to figure out how they can get it through in the ultimate way that will go through with the least amount of time. They can solve something before they submit the stuff. They're really glad. I'm telling you, because time is money for them. They're coming to extra meetings and then they have to do it. And they have to come in public at night. And it just ends up being a problem. And I think that's where that planning department used to have the reputation. Well, they tell you right away, this is the problem, because they had history. Now it might be different. Go ahead, John.
Jeff, if you were still going at one.
No.
Okay. I just want to probably finally have a coffee shop in North here for a while, but something's finally opening now.
He hasn't come back.
Mocha's up there now.
Oh.
There's a new place that just opened up. I'm very happy about it. It's in the,
Cal or whatever.
it's like Mocha, I think it's called.
Yeah, Mocha.
MOKA. It's,
The strip mall up by Jimmy's Pub.
Yeah.
You all realize that it's Lansing.
Oh, that fast? That's fast there, isn't it? It's my way home.
I just.
No, but, yeah, exactly. Good point, Josh.
That was always the question.
Yeah.
Do you know the boundaries? Oh, yeah, okay.
But, so just back to something we were talking about earlier, I think we have to, Jeff said something earlier about, we can submit this to council and if they decline it, that's on them. And I'm paraphrasing your point there, but that was, and I think that we kind of have to ask ourselves what our ultimate goal here should be, because I think our ultimate goal should be to present council with something that they will accept. And I think if we are presenting something to council that has a lower probability than accepting it and putting it to the voters, we're not accomplishing our, how would we? I think we have a good idea that if and it'll help with Mark's here.
Can I just interject? Jill's a good person all the time. I think if you put this, someone's gonna think it's kind of fishy that you put this on there. She said that a couple times, not on this, but on other ones, the way we paraphrase things, they're gonna think something's up. And you better go,
Well, it looks like, yeah, sometimes it looks like we're trying to take away.
yes,
By clearing something up, we're trying to take away from what we're doing. And that's why wordsmithing and some of this stuff is so important.
so I think that's where a good double check here every once in a while here.
And so if we have a more general policy, if we have something that puts it in the hands of council instead of dictating, but I don't remember who used the word dictating over there, to council, this is how the city will operate. I think telling council, like, you will have a deputy city manager assigned and everything we're doing here makes it much less likely that we're gonna get anything on the ballot regarding transparency. And if we want to get something on the ballot regarding transparency, which we do as a body, what I think we need to be focused on is what can we do that's both going to get through council and pass through the voters. And I think that's where I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier about, making a general statement that council will pass an ordinance with these minimum standards within a year of passage of the charter provision. I think that's something that's gonna both be, I would hope, amenable to council, as well as certainly would get through the ballot process. And having something that's complex, that's gonna cause potential disagreements, that's gonna just say, that council can just say, rightly or wrongly, no, we don't want to do this, it wouldn't be accomplishing what we're setting up to do here. So I think we need to be thinking about that when we ultimately vote on something.
And to add to that, I think if we think we're doing something that even council will have a problem with, I think this group has good rationale for why they're doing this, and that will be important when we're at the council sessions, to be able to defend this and say why. They might, if you start to see a conversation like this, I don't know that this is necessary, we're doing that already. We can be the voice that's saying, this is our experience, this is what we heard, this is very important for us to set the tone in the city. And as Dr. Martinez said, we have that right to do that, to put that in the charter.
I just say, I heard from one council member, I am told that she's heard from another, she said that something that's extensive on transparency, so I don't know what the sense of council's place said. As far as I'm for saying that, something more than that was suggested. That passes the law.
Well, that can also be what Lynn says, the ordinance comes with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, we're not really equipped to draft an ordinance, so it's something else.
Get out the junk information, I think we're.
Sign that.
Go for it.
City manager. Pass.
City manager.
I can see that's going on there. But, well, I hope you all feel like it's been a good discussion. I think we're all on the same page. I think we are hearing that we want something in the charter with transparency. It's been said since the first meeting practically. Just have to do it in a way, first of all, that sends a message, the right message about who we are as a city and how we do it. And that's what we'll work on.
Jeff had mentioned that he was wanting to tweak it, bring something back. I don't know if that's still on the table.
Yeah, I think so. I was expecting.
I'll do something before next meeting. Everybody knows something.
We can all write notes then.
Like,
Satisfy everyone?
political compromise.
I do appreciate that you put something together to react to rather than just verbal.
I would recommend that you get that deputy manager out of there if you can. But somebody more knowledgeable, because one point I thought that Mark Lee said was great. Is that the person's got to know if this is pass or fail. Was this responsive to what they asked for? Because it sounds like whatever's coming, he or she's just ship it out. Well, got to be at least somebody who can determine if that was what they were asking.
Any suggestion on who that should be or? should we say,
No, but you know,
a
we don't
person?
really have a deputy city manager. Well, this just looks like we're trying to get a new position in or
Yeah.
something.
You just say it's the senior administrator.
Right,
Nothing.
right. Give a final review, just a final review.
Yeah, I was gonna add either way, I think like it might be even more beneficial to like prescribe like additional duties to the city manager. That way, like no matter who he appoints to do it, or whoever the city manager is appoints to do it. Yeah, they have like, that's one of their duties, like, so it's coming from the city manager backed by that full like fourth authority.
What about the city manager or? It says like designee.
I think that's a good.
But a senior administrator, because we already see that it's being designated to someone in a low bureaucratic level.
They can do the work, but before it goes out, it needs to be reviewed by a person of knowledge. That would be.
I'm just gonna put down the city manager in this thing, who review that, what we've already approved, in light of what we have at CDC. That's sort of at the end.
I just like report goes on the consent agenda every month.
Besides this, Diane, on the agenda coming up, we have this few more chapters and we're basically, the last few meetings, I'm sure. If anyone has anything else or just on what
Well,
whiteboard type stuff we're talking about.
yeah, so why don't you let me go back and, kind of redo that, because we know that we're not getting volumes of people coming here. And we have the whiteboard and we have the preamble that we talked about that we wanted to set the tone, so we can talk about that as a not as a possibility, but we can work on wording on it too in those meetings. But it seems like we should be able to get this done on our time frame. Everybody
And
agree?
that other report, we make some general. The ground.
That's a whiteboard.
Was that our
Yeah,
way?
yeah, but-
Yeah, and I've been keeping track of those, so I'll write those up too, and we'll,
That's something I give myself down. Well, that's something that could go.
okay, well, if there's anything else.
We had another item.
No. But it's continued to the 6.5, and that's the compilation of this, that's where the city charter is gonna be located, electronic or in the library. That's the one that we would take there to next week. It says the city charter will be located in the library, and then the library, you know, as we said, we should get that really
They're
clear.
making a whole piece of history, where they're excited to be. Yeah, they've got a particular Missouri reference librarian assigned to it. That's who gave me the link to the charter and the catalog.
And see, that's again, we have a new library director and it's not as familiar, and they didn't have the one that had this 12 years of experience didn't give the handoff to the new person. It was an interim, and that's really hard.
He is very excited about his civic duties.
Yeah, his interview, he was that way too. All right, thanks, Cam.
Meeting, yeah, meetings.
All right, so yeah.
And we're not being attacked.
We have we're on the third and then not until May 1st.
I don't know.
All right, so anything else other than adjournment, motion to adjourn?
I'll move for it.
Thanks, Jonathan. And Russ, thank you, second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.
My mask was covered on. I didn't recognize.